Hello and welcome to the Beyond Podcast. And today we are continuing a thread that we have been dancing through over the last few years, and me personally, the last couple of decades, actually. I started counting the other day, of this journey into extended women's writing from the period, as well as the Tragedy of Mariam, which is very dear to our hearts, and hopefully more on that will be coming. We have already done our full cast audio adaptation, but there are other versions available, some of them available online, and one of them was produced by my guest, who are you and what is your purpose in life?
Right. Well, my job description is a Professor of Drama and Theatre Studies, and my name's Elizabeth Schafer. I don't know what my purpose in life is, but I have spent an awful lot of time thinking about the Tragedy of Mariam, Fair Queen of Jewry. I am part of the group of people who work in academia who are mad about Mariam and love the play.
So, let's start a little about your journey towards the play. How did you first encounter it? How was your interest first piqued? Yeah, how did you first encounter Mariam?
Right, so I'm quite historical, really, and when I started my PhD, supervised by Richard Proudfoot at King's, the first instruction I received, I was writing about comedy as it happened. The first instruction that I received was go away and read every extant play written between 1580 and 1620, and then we'll discuss comedy. And I can't guarantee that I read every extant play, but I did read an awful lot of them. So I really had a sense of the variations in quality. And then I went on and I did my PhD, and I'm really interested in comedy. So this is important to stress because it means that my love affair with Mariam is even more bizarre given my commitment to comedy. And then after I got my PhD, I found Mariam. And it was terrible, it was one of them, I don't know, Malone Society, something like that text. I went, oh, hang on, I missed this. And then I thought, now, Richard Proudfoot is known for his meticulous scholarship, and he didn't ever mention Mariam. So I did confront Richard. Now, I might have false memory here, but my memory is that Richard actually said he hadn't read Mariam, which, given his encyclopedic knowledge, is astounding. I thought, right, I'm going to do a production, Richard, and you are going to come to it. So I did a production of Mariam at Royal Holloway using student performers who were not actor training students at all. They were doing a drama degree. We had an extraordinary range of students, and we did this production, and Richard Proudfoot did turn up to see it. So there's a happy ending to that story. But it wasn't just that I read it and went, oh, this is by a woman, and how isn't it too predictable that I didn't encounter it as I marched my way through all the plays that I could get my hands on, written and published between 1580 and 1620. I mean, personally, I would actually go quite a lot further now because I do a lot of work on Richard Broome, who hadn't even been noticed, of course, by 1620. But the thing that really startled me about Mariam was the dramaturgy. And I just went, this is so different. It's not just Salome's Rights of Women's speech, which is, I think, the best audition speech from the entire early modern period. But I have never encountered a play before where you've got to, is it Act 1, Scene 5, before a man is allowed on stage? If you summarise this play, a woman comes on, another woman comes on and joins her. They argue, and then another woman comes on, and this is unlike any other play from the period. And I found it really exciting. I mean, it's a very troubling text in many ways, but I just felt really angry that I had not been exposed to this play at all. Now, at the time that I did my production, Stephanie Wright had just beaten me to the sort of first recorded production since the early modern period. And I did go up and see her production, which was put on in the theatre in Bradford. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And I did my production very differently. But I just went, these two productions say very different things about the play. And it is really important that anyone on the planet who is interested in Mariam should have access to that. So I started writing about Mariam in performance. And because I'd been working in Australia, I knew that in Australia and New Zealand, there were people who were interested. And I thought, so we have to remember this production was mid-90s. So the technology is also part of the story. I was very fortunate that one of my colleagues, Sian Busby, who went on to become a novelist and then very tragically died young. But Sian Busby was in the media arts department, and she said, well, I can film this. And I went, oh, well, and then I could send video cassettes to people I know across the planet. And they will have access to a production. And what I was very fortunate about is that Sian used absolutely cutting edge technology for whenever it was, mid-97, something like that. And so although the production is still there on YouTube and it looks very dated in terms of, color and film quality, she used technology that was good enough then to transfer later from video onto the internet. And so suddenly there was this resource available that anyone who's interested in teaching Mariam and helping people journey through the text can refer to this text. I mean, you can argue with what I did. I'd argue with what I did. It's a long time ago. I'm a different person now. And also I am not a director. I did actually direct that production because I felt so strongly about it, but I'm not a director. Normally I'd be working as a dramaturg. I just thought that, if I were to be teaching Mariam, I would like to be able to say to students, and there's this student video, so don't expect the RSC, but here's some students making sense of the play and performance, putting in interpretation, cutting, which is a very interpretive act, doing things with this text that elucidates, picks out the theatrical intelligence of the text. And I do think there's theatrical intelligence in the text, but I do think that some people will not be able to see it. And I'm not going to name any names, but I did, encounter someone who very respected, I'm sure it's coincidental, male professor, who just told me that the reason Mariam wasn't done was because it was a dreadful play. And I just went,
you've brought up several things, some of which are very much to the heart of what we do. Yeah, and I too have seen, occasional tweets online, things like, but is it a play? And I'm going, yes, of course it's a play. And the vital importance of recording and disseminating as widely as possible. One of the problems that we have with the theatrical repertoire is you can't save the theatrical repertoire with theatre. You can do it, but you need something else as a push, which is why we're essentially a digital company that occasionally does live shows. Because unless you actually keep reminding people, a mass of people, it doesn't have an impact. So that recording is so important. Whatever limitations one may say, it's actually, on a very nuts and bolts level, actually a very good recording in the sense you can hear what people are saying, because people often record things, but they take no time to make sure you can actually hear the sound, and that's often a flaw in so many recordings. So, and also when you're talking about cuts, that Mariam is a text where the cuts make such a big difference to what the play is saying. And one of those problems that people always have with a play, a neoclassical play with lots of long speeches, is they pick up the script, they look at the long speeches and say, I'm not having any of that, and they put it down. Whereas actually you put it in performance, the audience don't know how long the speeches are until they get to the end of them. It's a very different experience. And also audiences rise to the challenge. I was very surprised recently when we recorded Cleopatra by Samuel Daniel in front of a live audience that was possibly the most focused attention that we had in a season of plays. There was something about that show where I went in with very low expectations of audience, retention after the interval, and no, it really focuses the mind. But how you then cut a play like Mariam, is so important, because then you don't necessarily have all of those long speeches, and it becomes very different. And it's a very dynamic play, actually, in comparison with, as I just said, Samuel's
Yeah.
Annual. There's an awful lot of dramaturgical work. In a sense, the problem I have with the play as a structural thing, I don't think it ever recovers from how good Act 1 is. In my mind, Act 1 is so good.
Yeah.
It is such a brilliant piece of clockwork maneuvering of characters. It's just an astounding piece of work. And it is that sense of Act 2 is sort of a little disappointing, because it sort of throws in additional plot points and additional characters. Whereas that first act is so good.
Yeah. No, I do agree with you. Although what we found in our production with a live audience, and of course what's online was we all went over to the television studio and redid it there. So we hadn't got an audience there. But we did find that the entry of Herod was suddenly, things changed very, very considerably. And our cast was all female, which reflected, the group, although we brought a young lad on to play the son, because we kind of, I don't know quite what we were doing there really, but we were sort of gesturing at the patriarchy or the continuity. Mind you, he probably gets killed anyway. But it was an all female production, so it was a woman playing Herod, but she was so good at kind of holding it in front of the close-up in front of the camera. I was very, very impressed by her. That kind of sense of how good Act 1 is, and the different movements. There are, in my view, bits in Mariam that are very hard to stage. I found, Constavaris and the Two Sons quite less interesting. But what really infuriates me is the arguments that this play was not written to be performed, and then therefore is unperformable, or therefore should not be performed. Red Not Dead have never done it. And I'm kind of going, you have done so many really rubbish plays written by men. Why would you not do Mariam? But the arguments, which I've encountered many times, is basically it's not dynamic because it's not written to be staged. And I think that is so wrong. I mean, Stephanie Wright, certainly, but Alison Findlay, so many people have kind of gone, well, there is no evidence that it was staged, but that doesn't actually demonstrate that it wasn't staged.
Or that it wasn't written to be staged. I mean, the fight with Constavaris. And there was a recent production last year that Cuthurst did, and I actually thought that was one of the most. They did something very clever with that, with the music, because they're building up to the fight, and it's like, challenge me. No, I'm not. Go away. And there was this constant little musical beat behind it, and then the moment he said, "I'm calling you a coward," and he goes, "Aha, thank you. You have given me a reason to fight you now." And the music cut out at that point, and I thought that was such an intelligent decision on that production, because it put into sharp focus what the game of that scene was, and that it is a dynamic game before you have a sword fight as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did not do the sword fight because we'd got female drama students who none of them were fighters. If we'd have had a fighter, we could have done. But my personal belief is that Elizabeth Cary wrote this to be performed at home. Her uncle Sir Henry Lee was always staging mega tournaments for Queen Elizabeth. She was closely related to someone who knew about events management, who knew about theatricality. And why would she not perform this? But she would perform this using the people she knew, the household in Burford. And she would have had people on hand who could do sword fighting, because all aristocratic young men could do some sword fighting. So I'm sure that stage direction, which when you're reading the play, you tend to kind of just flip over. But in the theatre, and I would argue in Cary's, staging, which I am convinced took place, that would be a really important moment, and people, probably really appreciated the fight. The real crunch for me, though, is the black clothes of Herod. Herod and the attendants and the black clothes, and the attendants come on and they do nothing. Herod's attendants come on, they do nothing, and they're there for the visual, for the theatrical. It's incredibly hard if you're reading a text to go, I am keeping in my memory that Herod has got attendants. That is a moment of theatricality. And Mariam wearing black, the impact of those black clothes, that is so important, and that is such a visual thing. So I just do want to say, you know, anyone who uses the word closet drama in relation to Mariam around me, I start kind of hissing and spitting.
Yeah, we don't use closet drama at all, actually. I mean, I just go, is it neoclassical? That's sort of where we're going with, because I think it effectively became a term of abuse as well. It became a way of saying, this isn't really a play, let's ignore it. And our approach for any play, and you know, even the more extreme neoclassicals that really are people walk on, do a speech and walk off again, is that, you know, what is the best face for any production? What is the best production? Now, Mariam isn't perfect, but then what play is? And our job is to understand, well, what are the options? What are the directions you can push this? It has a slight exposition problem with the opening. I think it needs a prologue for an audience, or something visual to explain, because they have a very complicated family relationship that is, the play kind of expects you to know before you start. But you're right, it's got these wonderful visual elements. That the arrival of Herod, which for a modern audience, again, it's perfect for a modern production, because it's got a great interval point. Herod's dead, Act 1, first half. Herod's not dead, second half. It's really good. So the idea that Herod arrives, and that's when all the men with guns turn up, you know, in a sort of modern image. That he turns up with all the whereas it's actually a very domestic, very small universe when he's away, and then he comes back, and suddenly the stage looks different.
Well, it's like the arrival of patriarchy, because the stage is domestic, but it's completely run by women, and then the woman who's going to win is the one who knows how to and is willing to manipulate the patriarch. So Salome knows what to do to get Herod to cooperate with her plans, whereas Mariam knows but refuses.
It's like Constabaris is there just saying, hi, I will represent the patriarchy for a while in some scenes.
But I am hopeless, and I am husband number 2, and I'm on the way out, and I'm a fool, I'm a cuckold, I'm absolutely. I mean, I have kind of written a bit about this, but you know, the thing that really gets me annoyed is that the term closet drama is from the late 18th, early 19th century, but a play from that period, Wojciech, never gets called closet drama. You know, but it was written for a stage that the professional theatre in the 1820s was not capable of staging Wojciech. It took Brecht, really, but it took someone in the modern period to say, hey, what an amazing play. So that's your challenge. You can do a Brecht on Mariam and convince everyone that it's as amazing as it is. But you are right, there are moments that you know, are weaker, but like Shakespeare's plays are full of weak moments. But through history, you just look at the RSC, all these supposedly great directors, they all sit around and solve the problem. Well, not always solve it, but you know, they go, how can we do this?
And they have the advantage of hundreds of years of active performance to say, we all know that Act 5 of Julius Caesar is a bit shit. And you have to find a way of getting through the last part of the play. But everyone knows that, so they can turn up with that in mind of how to deal with it.
No one wants to play Malcolm in Macbeth because it's such a crap part.
And to say, it has the advantage that it isn't an excessively long text before it starts. So, and there are, I think, you know, reasonable cuts to be made before you even get down to the nitty gritty. So it's not like this is a 4-hour play that you're going, I can't envisage it. It's actually a very manageable. It doesn't have a massive cast. You could have a massive cast, but it doesn't automatically need a massive cast. So it's within reach, and this is where when you were saying, you know, Red Not Dead at the Globe haven't done it. I'm sorry, but since they built the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse, they've had 10 years. I'm sorry, that's just a fail. I'm getting more militant on this. I really
Yeah.
am. I normally would cut this out, but actually I think I'm going to leave this in. I'm sorry, you've just. I don't understand. You just clearly don't care.
I agree. I applaud that. I second that. I endorse that in every way possible.
Yeah, it's like we've got the perfect one of the maybe not the absolutely perfect, but there are several really good spaces that bigger companies have that would work very well for this text. And that said, I'd be quite interested to see it in a big space. Actually, it doesn't have to be small.
We did as part of a conference in honor of Anne Thompson. We did manage to get a very edited version of Mariam onto the Globe stage, and that was working with professional performers, and Bex McCutcheon directed that. And I have to say, I mean, it was December and it was cold, and we were standing in the yard. There were some bemused tourists who were, having a look around, and suddenly Mariam came out on stage and started performing. But there was this extraordinary feeling when that beginning speech, which speaks of transgression, but there was this real feeling of transgression, that we had actually got this tiny version of Mariam onto the Globe stage, even though Red Not Dead kept boycotting Cary. It's just that was a very thrilling moment, despite the cold.
That's in the sense your second phase of Mariam. I mean, in the sense Mariam became a part of your shall we say your academic life, rumbling in the background, I'm sure. But after the 90s performance, you did return to the play in the 2010s.
Yeah, well, that's right, because it was a coincidence, really. I went to a production, a reading in a pub in London somewhere, directed by Rebecca McCutcheon. I kind of filed that away in my mind, and then she became one of my colleagues at Royal Holloway. That's I don't know, Dionysus or something, the gods of theatre going, I think you need to have a conversation about Mariam. So I did have a conversation with her. Then it was coming up to the celebration. Well, we celebrated the publication of Mariam in 1613, and so Bex actually is brilliant at site-specific theatre. That's one of her real areas of expertise. So we hiked off to Burford. We became part of the Burford Festival. Again, Bex was working with professional performers and designers, but the church in Burford was very hospitable and allowed us to stage this thing in various nooks and crannies. And because Rebecca McCutcheon was directing, we used a lot of nooks and crannies. That kind of is completely not how I would imagine Mariam staged in Elizabeth Cary's lifetime. But the nooks and crannies aspect of it really kind of resonated for me, because I do use that word advisedly, I imagine that one of the reasons that the speeches are quite long is she could dish them out to relatives and friends and go, right, okay, learn that, and this is the sort of character you can play, and that there would have been a certain amount of nook and cranny work, particularly because, I mean, we know she got into trouble for reading when she was young. She probably had to find a nook or a cranny to write this play in. So that kind of extraordinary encounter with Burford was very, very creative for me, and just made me even more excited about the play, but made me see it in a completely different way. I mean, Rebecca was able to find comic moments that I had never found, and she was able to produce some fantastic performances.
Yeah, there is comedy in this play. I think we should state that, again, unlike a lot of neoclassical drama, there is the whole exchange between Salome and Herod is loaded with potential. And again, that's a production choice. You don't have to go for comedy there, but the option is there. And also Constabarus and his fight scene, actually, that could be comic. I mean, there's a sort of scrappy-do quality to he keeps coming at him and going, go away.
Yes.
So there are levels within the text that you can play with.
Yeah, absolutely. But also because of you had to shake it up in order to do what we were doing in the church. So in terms of cutting, it didn't have to sort of have the same decorum perhaps that I felt that I needed when I was working on it, because when Salome was sitting actually in front of the altar, it was just such an amazing and plotting all these terrible things. It was such a sort of amazing journey. But then the next thing is we're off down the aisle to visit Mariam, who's stuck in prison somewhere. So the kind of sense of the narrative was very creatively disrupted. And after we did that, I mean, the one regret I have about Burford is that it really brought home to me that when I first got interested in Mariam, I should have gone straight to Burford, because in those days the priory was actually a convent and the nuns used to let you in. And then the nuns closed the convent and sold the priory to Elizabeth Murdoch, and she doesn't let you in. So I wrote a very polite letter, because I had this idea that if you could look around Burford Priory, you could get a sense of the spaces that she was used to, and you know, I'm not quite sure what I would have made of that. But yes, being in Burford made me very aware that Elizabeth Murdoch was now in the Priory, not the friendly nuns. But then after that, this opportunity came up. I was asked to do something as part of the conference in honour of Anne Thompson. And I just went, I'll try it. Could we do a mini Mariam? So I produced a mini Mariam script. And so there's that side of it. But the other side, which, as you say, like, it's really important that the discussions take place. So I keep writing about Mariam. And in fact, I've just written a piece about Jasmine Silk's production for Cutpurse Theatre, which, as you say, was on so recently. And I thought that was a splendid and exciting and wonderful production. And it was such a new light on the play for me. And the energy from the band, that was just, so exciting, but also so illuminating, because energy is not actually something I personally associate with Mariam. I try to resist it, but I have got a slight sense that people come on and stand still and they talk. And of course they don't. People don't do that. People don't stand still when they talk. But there's something about the neoclassicism that, for me, as I'm not a director, I do kind of go, oh, well, they're standing there and talking. Because they might be talking to the audience, they can be moving around, they're doing all of those things that you would be instantly asking performers to do. But
yes, because they are dynamic. Even when they're doing speeches, they're dynamic speeches. Often with, and again, even here, we having dismissed Closet, we might dismiss neoclassical from the play, because if you took out the choruses, would you classify it that way? And I'm not sure you would. And the way the speeches move is very different. So often with a neoclassical play, you will have an argument. The argument will progress. It will move in a slightly different direction. The argument will then cease on whatever point the argument started at, and then it will move on. And there may be an emotional through line with it, but it will be relatively linear. With Mariam, the characters are going, oh, got this, what, and they're constantly dancing around the way people think. That opening speech is as much about this question of head and heart, of going, look, I'm having all these emotions. I don't know what to do with it. I'm over here. I should be thinking this. I think that. Oh dear, my mother's come in. It's a constant flow, and it gives an actor so much to do, to navigate. An opportunity to navigate, rather than, say, trying to make a speech more interesting. The speech is quite a wild ride a lot of the time.
It is. And I would say that's another brilliant, as it were, audition speech, were it not for the fact that you do need to know your Herods and your Caesars.
And it's not always clear which Caesar they're talking about as well. There's little things
the pronouns could be clarified sometimes. When we did the student production at Royal Holloway, we actually used the argument as the prologue, and we slightly made fun of it because we had a family tree, which was supposed to make people, many of whom were students who were not familiar with Herod's family tree, kind of relax a bit and go, this is crazy and complicated, but go with it. If you've got that knowledge, that opening speech is utterly brilliant. And the opening line, for me, I feel that line speaks to me so much. I have often, with all kinds of voices run on. And I'm not entirely sure where it gets me sometimes, but that sense of women and speech, particularly public speech, being so important. And in a play that I think was written to be publicly spoken, at least, within a confines of a home, home, castle, priory, whatever.
You make a good case on the structure of the play being a response to the probable actors that you have available. Because you do have a lot of quite random parts who turn up for a scene and then are never seen again. And I think that does speak of writing to, okay, X can do this, Y can do that. These are the people who are about. They're not going to be able to be in the whole thing. They can do a scene. That's probably their limit. We can rehearse separately. It speaks to a mode of production rather than someone simply thinking this. I mean, there are counter arguments to that, but that feels plausible. I think that's a reasonable, and certainly a reasonable hypothesis for a staging if you wanted to do it that way.
I'm very conscious of the fact that I am sort of imagining and projecting to a certain extent, but it does seem to me that Mariam is quite a manageable play to stage. And then there was a period in Mariam criticism where it became very unfashionable to talk about biography. I cannot resist talking about Elizabeth Cary's biography. I think as an academic, I'm always going to be likely to over-identify with a young woman who was desperate to read and got into trouble for reading so much, and who managed to keep producing work even though she had all those kids and breakdowns and postnatal depression, and it's a fascinating biography. But just to come back to the question of the staging, what would be really interesting then is to think about what role Elizabeth Cary might have played, because if she were to be playing Mariam, that says something about her life. But also, if she's memorized Salome's speech, then that speech will be handy in later life.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, but the speeches that I memorized when I was in like the crucible at school in the 1970s are still sort of in there. So when you get into crisis with your marriage and you've written a play like Mariam, I think both Mariam and Salome are going to be haunting the way that she journeys through, the separation with her husband. So while I understand why people go, oh, you can't talk about the biography too much, I think creatively you can, because fascinating things going on.
Speaking from a producer's point of view, I think that is also a hook that an audience is interested in knowing about, and that is part of, I think, the process that inevitably will be part of some productions. We had the same with Iphigenia, when talking about its historical moment when it was written, and why would someone choose to write a translation of this play, and the slight tweaks that are made to the play. That's a play where the historical moment is almost imposing itself on a performance. So for our version, we basically had the chorus was Lady Lumley, so that she's almost writing it as she's going along, and these people are appearing, and that was sort of what we had in mind for that. And so for that play, an original costuming and a household logic imposes itself. Now, Mariam, I think, is more flexible, but I think that's definitely a route you could go down, and I think there will be an audience that would be very interested in that. Now, that's not necessarily to say it's intellectually rigorous or not full of pitfalls, but speaking as a producer, it feels like that's inevitably going to be an angle that will be part of a production.
I mean, you do have to sort of consider some of the aspects of Elizabeth Cary's biography are very inspiring, but as with all feminist heroines, I mean, she also does stuff that might not be quite so inspiring. And for many people, her translations of various Catholic treatises possibly won't be top of their bestseller list or must-read list. But I just think that she shows such determination, and she keeps going. I mean, with the kind of patriarch thing with Herod, I was go, well, when you think of the patriarchs that Elizabeth Cary was defying, you know, in the 1620s, Charles I told her to sort things out and, you know, make it up with her husband, but she just didn't, and obviously she completely disobeyed and subverted, and you know, her husband probably jeopardized his career, silly old sod. But anyway, and I think that's kind of exhilarating.
But there's an interesting duality between the two married couples of the play, in the sense that both Mariam and Salome are in marriages that neither of them are working for different reasons. And when I first did the play, trying to figure out what to do with Constabaris has grown on me weirdly as a challenge, as an acting challenge, as a directing challenge, because you sort of look at him as he's sort of the placeholder for the patriarchy, and he's there and he makes all these things, but his character is actually slightly more interesting than immediately he appears, and his journey is slightly interesting. Whereas Herod is a sort of tour de force before it's you hand it to someone who can do some barnstorming, or who really wants to play and do something. You know, there's potential there. Whereas Constabaris is more of a three-pipe problem, which I've sort of been niggling in the back of my head for a couple of decades.
Well, I think, I mean, with Herod comes a tradition. Herod's got a stage reputation in the way that other characters haven't, because, you know, people would have known about the mystery plays. Even, I mean, it's unlikely Cary or Elizabeth Tanfield, as she would have been, saw the mystery plays because they'd been closed down, but people in the audience would have seen mystery plays and would know about the kind of great ranting role that Herod was supposed to be. But I feel Constabaris is fascinating because he has the misogynist moment, you know. And what's really important about that is that it is there, so you can see what the women are dealing with,
and he thinks he's being perfectly reasonable. There is no sense he's a villain.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the difference between him and Herod. Herod is clearly a wrong-un who, like, you know, kills quite a lot of people. Constabaris is supposed to be the most honourable of people, and clearly does politically risky things for these question of honour and you know, fellow feeling for other chaps. He's also full of these terrible opinions. And actually everybody has a moment when they're a bit off. You know, Mariam has a truly horrendous experience with her mother to a degree, because when her mother comes on and starts saying, oh, I sent these portraits off and we did this, and it's a really fascinating moment of how is she reacting to this? How much has she internalized the really very overtly racist mother that she has, with the slightly more modified racism that classism that's going on inside Mariam as well. She's not a saint in that sense, and Salome isn't an out and out villain. She has really good motivations for doing everything she does. And from her point of view, she doesn't really have a choice but to get a lot of people killed because she can't get a divorce.
But, I mean, the thing is that her villainy, I think, is also, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but her villainy is exciting. And when we were doing the production at Royal Holloway, I actually just said, I'm not doing auditions. Just everybody write on a piece of paper what you'd like to play and anything you wouldn't want to play, and I'll see what comes out in the wash. And everyone who wanted to perform wanted to play Salome. That was the role they all wanted to play, because it's got such an energy. And she wins.
She wins. I mean, you could call the play The Triumph of Salome, because basically by the end, I mean, it's not in the play explicitly, but, you know, Herod basically dies and she takes over. It's the way the play flips. So she has this wonderful sort of proto-feminist moment of going, why can't we just divorce? Why can't we just divorce? And then immediately afterwards goes, well, I suppose I'll just have to get him killed then. And there's almost nothing between those two thoughts. And that's a really interesting dynamism for a play to be doing. And there aren't many plays that do that.
I also, because I've just written about Jasmine Silk's production, I also feel she really brought that out, and that she turned the Tragedy of Mariam into the comedy of Salome almost, because there was that kind of real sense at the end when there was that dancing of exuberance and just celebrating the success that Salome had achieved, and I thought that was an amazing piece of staging. And of course, also meant that everyone went out instead of going, "Oh, Mariam's dead." We all came out going, "Wow!" and headed, straight in the direction of a glass of wine or whatever to celebrate. And I thought that was very clever. I mean, obviously the music was helping tremendously there, but I thought that was very clever bit of staging. Yeah,
I had the advantage because I was doing an audio version.
The audio element of it is really interesting because the music of the text, that's something. I mean, I was working with some students who were not native English speakers, and that real kind of sense of, well, let's put it like this: Elizabeth Cary was capable of ambitious grammar, and sometimes the music and the sense were perhaps not working brilliantly. I think the chorus though is fascinating in terms of some of the choruses make me think, has the chorus actually been watching the same play as me?
Yeah.
They are so adrift that this must be a proto-Brechtian device. This chorus really is not keeping up, and so I'm very interested in what you do with the chorus. And the one thing that I really disagreed with Stephanie Wright, and her production was very, very interesting, and I have the most extraordinary bad video recording of it. But she had two women folk singers, singing the chorus. And it was really fascinating, the sort of creative damage that did to the choruses, because the voices were lovely and you heard the music and you didn't register the words, partly because they were being sung, but also because the music was lovely. Do you see what I mean?
Yes,
yes. And that really made me think, no, these choruses are meant to be grit. They are meant to not be easy to listen to. So a bit like Constaboris's misogyny speech. This is important so that you know what the women are pushing back against.
Yes, and this is a society. These are different characters. They all have inner lives. They have a reason for being what they are. Not all of it is nice. And nobody is an absolute villain and no one is an absolute saint. And that's why it's a drama, and that's why it works. And if it didn't do that, that would be terrible.
That would be very boring. Yes.
Yeah. We are sadly running very much out of time for this chat, but certainly we're going to keep pushing for more Mariam. And if you at home would like to hear more on this, then do get in touch. You can support us on our Patreon and vote for us to do more Mariam. We are very much beholden to our patrons to choose the plays that we do. They chose Mariam. They chose Iphigenia. I think I made them do Tragedy of Antony, but you can't always win. And support us, and these things will happen. So, any final thoughts from my guest? Anything you would like to plug at this time, or anything about Mariam that we haven't said? Speak now, or forever hold your peace.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Speak out. That's what Mariam says. That's Mariam's problem. Speak out. You do need to speak out. You need to speak out, whether it's about Mariam or whether it's about the environment. Speak out.
And with that, thank you very much, and we will be back anon with more on this. Thank you very much, my guest, and goodbye.